In this video, we'll be using variables to capture information provided to us by the learner. We'll use those variables to change the state of the certificate page at the end of the lesson. So we'll collect the user's name, see how they do on a drag and drop activity, and we'll display their name and their score on the certificate page. A variable is a container that can be used to store information. So we can take a text value, place it in a variable, and then retrieve it on a different page. We can also manipulate data when it's stored in a variable. For example, we can store a number, and then modify it, and then get the result. Let's look at an example. We want to collect the learner's name here on page 1, and then show it on a certificate page later. To collect the learner's name, we need to use a text input object. So we don't want to use one of these regular text objects. Instead, we want to scroll down till we find the text input object. So we'll select that and add one to our page. Now, technically, this is all that we need. The learner will see this, they'll be able to type in their name, and when they click outside of it, we could store their name in a variable or display it on the page. However, because we're dealing with humans, we need to provide some instructions, as well as perhaps a button and some sort of feedback to let them know things are working. So let's scroll back up and grab a regular text object, and we'll type in here, please enter your name, and I'll also add a button and change the label to say submit. If we preview this, we'll see the instructions here, which cannot be edited, and the input text where the learner can enter their name. And then a submit button, which doesn't do anything because we haven't set up any actions yet. So let's set up those actions. So I'll select my submit button and then come over to the action canvas and choose this when submit on click. And now what we want to do is we want to take the value that's typed in here and store it into a variable. So to get a variable, we'll come over to the variable tab, and we'll use this set global variable 1 to something. So we'll add that to our canvas. And I don't want to use global variable 1. So what I'm going to do is click the drop down and say create new variable. And then here I will type in the name of the variable that I want. In my case, I'll call it name underscore var and say create. And I'm not going to be setting it to a number, so I'll just take this 0 and throw it away. So what am I going to set this variable value to? Well, whatever they typed into this text input. So I'll select that. And I could try to use this text input 1 here, but what this is a reference to the object itself. So as you can see, it's what's used here to show or hide the object. We don't really want the object. What we want is a text inside of the object. So instead what I'll do is I will scroll down to the bottom, and here I'll find this purple block that says text input 1.text. So this will return the contents of my text input object. So we'll add this to our action canvas and place it in here. Now whatever they type into the text input will be set into our global variable called nameVar. In order to test this properly, we'll need to set up our certificate page. But before we do that, let's set up some of our visual feedback. So what I'll do is I will select the Submit button, and I'll scroll up and choose the Hide Submit. And I will also disable our text input. So I'll select that and scroll down to Set Text 1 Enabled to False. And we'll add that as well. So now after they click on the Submit button, it's going to update the variable with whatever they typed in. It's going to hide the Submit button and disable our text input. So let's preview this. Type in a name and click Submit. That disappears, and our text input is no longer editable. Now we want to show the name on our certificate page, so we need to create a certificate page. I'll also create a couple of placeholder pages that we'll come back to and fill out later. So we'll come down here to our flow, and I will right-click and say New Page. And just so that we're not confused by a completely blank page, I'll just add a shape object here. And then I'll add a new page again. So we'll right-click on our last page, say New Page. And again, I'll add another shape. Then we'll right-click and say New Page. And then this one will become our certificate page. So I'll double-click on the name and change it to Certificate. Next, I will add an image. And then double-click. And here I will choose this certificate image. If you have your own certificate image, you can use that, or you can just use a shape as a placeholder. So we'll open that, add that onto our page, and I'll go up to my alignment tools and choose Center Horizontally. So this will center it on the page. And I'm going to make this a little bit smaller as well, because I'm going to have a top bar that sits up here. So we'll do that again. Center horizontally. And now I'm going to add some text. So we'll say congratulations. So I'll add a text, plain text object and say congratulations. I'll make that bold, larger font, and I will center align the text in the text box, and then also go up to my alignment tools and center on the page horizontally. And then from here, I'll just copy and paste using Control-C and Control-V. So I'll add another one, and this will become the name output. And this one, it doesn't really matter what I type in here, because as soon as we load the page, we're going to swap this out with the text that was entered on page 1. So we'll test it out, and we might end up changing what this says. So again, I'll center that, and I will turn off the bold. And then I will duplicate this again. I can use Control-D to duplicate. And what is this certificate for? We'll just make up something. And I'll make this a slightly smaller font. We'll choose size 32. And we'll make this a little bit wider. Maybe we'll go with 30. And bold. All right, that looks pretty good. Next, we'll set up the action to update our name output text. So I'll come over to the action canvas, and we want to update this as soon as they arrive on the page. So I'll go over to the Page tab, and I will choose When Page on Load. So we'll add that to our action canvas. Next, I want to update this text, so I'll select that and say set nameOutput.text to something. So I'll add that. And I could type in a name here, but what we really want is whatever they typed in and that we stored in the variable back on page 1. So we don't really need a text value. What we need is a reference to the variable. So to find that, we'll go to our Variable tab, and here I'll use this get variable. So we'll add that, and what we need to do is in this dropdown, choose the variable that we created earlier. In our case, it was the name var. So I'll select that, and now this will return the value in the variable. So we'll put that in here. And if we were to preview this right now, this variable is blank, so this would become blank. So what we need to do is return to page 1 and preview from there. However, at the moment, we don't really have a way to get from page 1 to anywhere else in the lesson because we don't have anything on our master. We don't have any back or next buttons. So before we go back to page 1, let's go ahead and apply a template. So I'll come up to Template, Apply Template. And here I want to add a master template for navigation, so I'll select that category. And from here I can select any one of these. In my case, I'll choose this word icons template and say apply to page. And I want to apply this master to all the pages on top. So I'll make sure that's selected and then click OK. Once the template has been applied, I'll return to page 1. And we'll preview from here. So here I will enter my name. Click Submit, and the Submit button disappears, and the text is disabled, so I can't change it. And now when I navigate to the 4th page of my lesson, as soon as I arrive there, this text is updated with the value from the variable. We've seen how we can use variables to transfer information from page to page, but we can also modify information in variables. In the next example, we'll do a little bit of math to calculate a score using a number variable. So let's go to our page 2, and here we'll delete our placeholder shape, and we will apply a template. So I'll go up to Template, Apply Template, and here I'll choose the drag and drop category and choose the matching drag and drop exercise. So I'll apply that to our page. And I'm going to change some of these values here. So the attempts allowed, I'll just give them 1. And I don't really care about feedback or the indicators. All of this is fine. And I'll make sure that I have 4 drag items with 4 drop zones. So I'll add one more here. And then I'll click OK. And all of the actions and objects were created to power this template. So this template's pretty sophisticated, but what we're going to do is simply add a few new actions here to calculate how many of these they dropped correctly versus how many total are possible. So to do this, we'll need to use a variable to collect however many they dropped correctly and then divide that by the total possible. So to start, we'll go to our Submit button, and I will grab the When Submit on click and add that to my Canvas 1. And then I will go to my Variables panel, and I'll choose the set variable to something. And here I will click on the drop-down. And I notice that there are some extra variables in here that I did not create. Some of these came from different templates. For example, these two menu-related variables came from my master template. These two down here with the template lesson map and the template question map came from this drag and drop template. And global list 1 and global variable 1 are the variables that come with a brand new lesson. So we're going to create a new variable, and this one we're going to call D&D score var. And I'm using underscores instead of spaces. So I'll click create. So how do we know how many things were dropped correctly? We can't just make up a number because it depends on if they dropped 2 correctly or 3 correctly or 4 correctly. So we need to ask an object that does know. And the object that knows that is this drag and drop object that's over here placed off screen. So when I select it, I can look at my flyout panel and see all of the various action blocks that are available. And right here, I have drag and drop 1 dot correct object count. So this is the one that I want, so I'll add that in here, and I'll replace the default number that comes with the variable. So now what I'm going to do is set my score variable to the correct object count. So right now, if I were to preview this, I can use some of my debug features to help me figure out what's going on. So I'll click on this debug button, and I'll move this over to the side so that I can see it. And I will expand my global variables, and here I can see all of the various variables. And here's the one that I'm going to be concerned with, the D&D score var. And it's undefined at the moment because we have never set it to anything. So let's go ahead and get a couple of these correct, and I'll get some of them incorrect. Then I'll click on my submit button. I get the visual feedback from the template, and if I come over to my debug console, I can click on the refresh, and here I can see the variable value was set to 2 because there are 2 items correct. So we're going to do a bit of math here and turn this 2 into 50%. Because there are 4 possible choices, we're going to be manipulating this 2 so that it turns into a percentage of how many they got correct. So to do that, I'm going to right-click on this variable here and duplicate it. And this time I'm going to reset this variable to some math based on the variable's current value. So here I can go back to my variable tab and choose get global variable 1 and change that to my D&D score var. And then I'll come back up to the value tab and I'll grab this addition action block. And I will change the addition to divide. And so now what I'm going to be doing is getting my drag and drop score var, which at this point is set to 2 if they'd gotten 2 correct, and I need to divide it by the total number possible. So I could type in 4 here because the highest value is 4, or I can go back to the drag and drop and figure out just how many drag items there are. So to do that, I can just select my drag and drop again, and again come back to this correct object count. So I'll add that in here, and I'll use the drop down and choose total drag object count. So I'll place this in here to replace my 4. That way, if I change my template to add more items or remove some items, this total drag object count will always be accurate. So here, I'm setting this variable to the old value of the variable divided by the total drag item count. So when we click the submit button, first that variable is going to be set to 2, because that's how many they got correct. Then we're going to divide that by the total number possible, which in this case is 4, so we'll get a score of 0.5. And then the last thing that we'll do is duplicate this again, and we'll want to change our score of 0.5 to 50. So the easiest way to do that is to change this division symbol to multiply, and then multiply it by 100. So we can go up to our value tab and grab the number value and add that to our action canvas. And I'll change this 0 to 100. And we'll add that in here. So now when we preview this again, and open up our debug console, so again, I'll get 2 of these correct, and I'll get 2 of them incorrect. I'll click on my submit button, and I'll refresh my variables, and I can see that the score var is now 50. So we took the 2 that were correct, we divided by the total number possible, got 0.5, and then multiplied that by 100 to get a nice round 50. If we reload this, this time I will get 100%, and we'll refresh, and we can see that our global D&D score var is set to 100. I don't think it's possible for me to get 75%, because if I place 3 items correctly, the 4th has nowhere else to go. So we'll reload this one more time. And I think I can get 1 correct. So we'll mix up some of these other ones. And here I've only gotten 1 correct, and when I refresh this, I can see it's 25%. So this D&D score bar is a pretty good indicator of how I'm doing here on this activity. So what good is this number? 25%, 50%, 100%? Well, once we have it in that format, we can very easily use a percent tracker. So let's add one to our page. So I'll come over to my objects, and I'll scroll down to the percent gauge, and I'll draw one here at the bottom, and I'll set the start value to 0, and this is a bar gauge that's going to fill up between 0 to 100%. So we'll put that here, and I will uncheck the start visible property. So I'll set it from true to false. And then after we've calculated this, I will show the percent gauge. So I'll select the percent gauge tab here because the item is selected, and I'll tell it to show. And then I'll open the flyout panel again, and I'll set my percent gauge value to, in this case I don't want 50, but we'll change that. So we'll add set %gauge value to something. And what are we going to set it to? Not 50, but our score. So I'll right click, duplicate, and plug that in here. So now when we preview this, I no longer need my debug console. I will just get some of these correct and some of them incorrect. And when I click submit, there's my %gauge that's showing up and then filling up to the appropriate amount. We'll run this again and get 100%. So that's looking pretty good. And we'll do one more thing. We'll go to our certificate and we'll display the score here. So I'll add a couple of text objects. So I'll just use regular text and say with a score of I'll place that here. And then I'll add another text object below that, or to the right of it. And here I'll just put some zeros as a placeholder. And so I don't confuse myself, I will change the name of this object. So instead of 000, I'll double click on the name in the cast and change it to score output. Then I will return to my action canvas and select my score output text and say set score output text to something. So we'll add that in here. I don't need the blank placeholder. Instead, I want a variable. So I can either duplicate this one and change it to point to the correct variable, or I can go back up to the variable tab and get a fresh reference there. So we'll grab this get variable and point to our D&D score and plug that in here. So now if we go all the way back to page 1 and preview from here, and here I see my name and the score, and I just need to make that a little bit wider. But the score is showing up. The very last thing that we will do is we will append a percentage sign here on this score. So I can select this score output text object and find the score output append text and add that. And then here I can just type in the % symbol, and now, depending on how they do, we can see the percentage with a % sign at the end. And with that, we're done with this video. Keep an eye out for future tutorials that will explore examples of richer interactions that use variables.